above where it was on the day the Federal Reserve supposedly cut interest rates last month. In New York, I'm David Brancaccio, Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
Florida State University license plates support scholarships for students at FSU, a preeminent institution that enriches and contributes to the state and nation. Gifts for first-time buyers can be found online at fsu.edu/mytag.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, with Hurricane Milton expected to make landfall tonight, we get the latest on the monster storm's path from longtime First Coast meteorologist Lauren Rautenkranz. Then, as local evacuations get underway, we review a last-minute checklist of storm preparations from the Red Cross. And from Medicare reimbursements to provider burnout, we ask American Medical Association President Dr. Bruce Scott about what's top of mind for the nation's doctors. Plus, from the quirky to the fabulous, the Arlington Mod and More home tour opens the door to Arlington's architectural landmarks. Join the conversation. You can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email questions or comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The National Hurricane Center says Hurricane Milton has weakened slightly to a powerful Category 4 storm. Top sustained winds are at 155 miles per hour. It's expected to make landfall on Florida's Gulf Coast late tonight or early tomorrow morning. NPR's Sergio Martinez-Beltran has more.
Millions of residents living in Tampa, Sarasota, and Fort Myers are under mandatory or voluntary evacuations ahead of Hurricane Milton's landfall. But time is running out for those who have yet to leave. Juan Domingo says he is staying in Fort Myers because there's nowhere else to go. Many hotels in the area have shut down and evacuated guests. And although Governor Ron DeSantis says there's no fuel shortage, many gas stations in the Fort Myers area have run out of gasoline. Sergio Martinez-Beltran, NPR News, Fort Myers, Florida.
Civil rights groups are asking a federal court to extend Georgia's voter registration deadline for this fall's election. This comes after Hurricane Helene stormed through the state. NPR's Hansi Lo Wong reports a court has already ordered South Carolina to push back its deadline.
October 14th is South Carolina's new deadline for eligible voters to sign up to vote in this fall's election. Civil rights groups are set to appear in federal court in Atlanta to argue for that same deadline extension in Georgia, where registrations ended this past Monday. In court filings, the groups say widespread closings of post offices and county election offices, plus power and internet outages, likely prevented tens of thousands of eligible voters in Georgia from getting registered. In two other states devastated by Hurricane Helene, Florida and Tennessee, the registration deadline is also passed. But eligible voters in North Carolina have until Friday to register online or by mail. After that, they can register in person during North Carolina's early voting period, which lasts for about 2 weeks beginning October 17th. Anzila Wong, NPR News.
Parents and child advocacy groups are voicing support for lawsuits filed against the social media platform TikTok. More than a dozen states and the District of Columbia are suing. NPR's Windsor Johnston reports they allege TikTok is harmful to the mental health of kids and is addictive.
The lawsuits argue that TikTok doesn't do enough to protect underage users from online harms. Mark Berkman with the Organization for Social Media Safety says the platform has too many addictive features that send kids down dangerous rabbit holes.
They employ what's called an infinite scroll, which is a design feature that continuously loads new videos for children as they swipe up. And that feature alone hinders a person's ability to accurately assess how much time they've spent scrolling.
The attorneys general also point out late-night push notifications that they say disrupt kids' sleep patterns, further exacerbating mental health issues. Windsor Johnston, NPR News.
TikTok calls the allegations wrong and misleading. You're listening to NPR.
Live from the Public Radio Emergency Network, I'm meteorologist William Maxim with an update on major Hurricane Milton. The Category 4 storm is currently located about 250 miles southwest of Tampa, with maximum sustained winds of 155 miles an hour. It's moving northeast at 16 miles per hour. Milton's expected to move across the eastern Gulf of Mexico today and make landfall along the west central coast of Florida late tonight or early Thursday morning. Storm surge warning is in effect for the Florida west coast from Flamingo northward to Yankeetown, including Charlotte Harbor and Tampa Bay. Storm surge could reach up to 12 feet in the Tampa Bay and Port Charlotte areas. There's also a tornado risk associated with Milton, with tornadoes possible throughout the day, particularly in central and south Florida. Currently, portions of central and south Florida are under a tornado watch until 9 p.m. This is the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network. Hurricane warnings are in effect from Bonita Beach to the Swanee River, including Tampa Bay. A hurricane warning means hurricane conditions are expected somewhere within the warning area. Tropical storm force winds are expected to reach the west coast of Florida, including Tampa Bay, later this afternoon or early in the evening. Rainfall amounts of 6 to 12 inches with localized totals up to 18 inches are expected across central and northern portions of the Florida Peninsula through Thursday. For the latest on Milton, keep it here on this station and download the Florida Storms mobile app. We'll be back in 1 hour for another update from the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network.
NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include American Jewish World Service, supporting human rights advocates worldwide in the fight for democracy, equity, and justice for all people. Learn more at ajws.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, we hear from the American Medical Association's president about everything from abortion rights to high-profile local fights between insurance companies and providers. Later, we preview the mid-century marvels on the Arlington Mod and More home tour. But first, as Milton races towards landfall in Florida, we get the latest on the storm's track and review what you need to get ready before local impacts begin. To start, we're joined by longtime First Coast meteorologist Lauren Rautenkranz. Good morning, Lauren.
Hi, Ann. It's so nice to talk to you.
It is delightful to talk to you as well, Lauren, and I miss seeing you every day. We just heard from the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network about sort of the general track of Milton. But, you know, there's interval updates on these storms. What do we know for the First Coast region based on the latest updates and whether anything has changed?
Yeah. So you know what? Obviously, it's one that we don't want to write off. I think the First Coast, and we all know firsthand that these storms that hit the West Coast very much impact us in Jacksonville and across Southeast Georgia and Northeast Florida. So I would say that right now, those southward trends overnight and first thing this morning, they've kind of stopped, right? We're getting very close to landfall. We should have that by this evening, and we will feel those effects pretty much in Jacksonville by the time your head hits the pillow tonight. I would say after midnight until about lunchtime tomorrow is going to be the worst window for us. And we are talking about the potential for some heavy rain, some heavy wind. We could have hurricane force gusts up into even Fernandina Beach and down through Palm Coast as well. But the rainfall coupled with that surge potential in places like St. Johns, Putnam, and Flagler counties is going to be something that I'm especially going to be watching. And then there are places that are vulnerable, right? Like the Swanee and Black Creek, where water levels could rise. One thing with the wind as well, Anne, is that we've had a lot of rain, right? And so any little bit of wind coupled with the rain, is going to lead to, you know, potential for power outages and trees to be, toppled over, just because those root systems are more kind of at risk as well.
And I know you can't explain necessarily the decisions that go into an emergency management call, but evacuation orders are in St. Johns County, large areas being under a mandatory evacuation, none in Duval. So what's the divide there? Why are we seeing that big difference?
I would say, the surge is going to be higher in places like St. John's and Flagler. We will still have a bit of surge, but in St. John's, we all remember in recent history, my tenure, at the local station there, we did have water into homes and businesses, unfortunately. And remember, the last few days, we've had this backup of wind out of the northeast. So we've had our nor'easter. So that keeps the waterways naturally a bit more elevated. Now we're going to add a bit of rainfall. And if that is ending up on the higher end of the scale, 8 inches or greater, we will have that onshore flow, exacerbated essentially with the core of the hurricane moving on through. I think St. Johns County, and just the way the topography is going to have more of an easterly breeze versus just, farther north in Duval County, we're going to have that kind of more northeasterly breeze.
Interesting. And so what are you thinking for the places that flooded in previous storms because of high river levels, the San Marcos, even the Palac, because I know you mentioned Black Creek, which often floods as well. But what are you expecting to see in those low-lying areas?
What's so tricky is that we get a random summertime thunderstorm and these places flood, if we have a high tide as well. So high tides are going to be something that people really want to focus on. So we're looking at the Main Street Bridge. So, downtown San Marco kind of region. Our critical times are going to be 3 a.m. Thursday. So this is after midnight tonight, and then 3 o'clock. So mid-afternoon tomorrow. I've got friends that have evacuated, but they didn't have to go far. Let's just say St. Johns County folks, they've went out to Waycross, and it's crazy because that's in our viewing area, but they're not going to see nearly the impacts. They're going to see just a breeze compared to what we could see, out along the coast in St. Johns County. St. Augustine folks, I want them to kind of be more on alert around 2 a.m. when we are going to have that easterly breeze. And the surge picks up a bit more with that core moving through. And then it's mid-afternoon again, 2 o'clock or so, 2:30.
And I just been hearing that, once the storm gets out over the ocean, that we could see even an increase in those winds picking up. Do you have any concern about that? Kind of it passes, but it remains without any friction to stop that wind when it's on the ocean?
Yeah, well, hopefully our jet stream is able to kick that off and away, at least the core of Milton, and it should remain extratropical and eventually weaken out to sea. But we are going to still have a front moving in as we head into early next week. So coastal showers could become kind of more of a nuisance for folks that do have cleanup and debris around, or maybe power outages. I will say, I'm a positive girl, Anne, and I do like to look on the brighter side. Is we have some really nice weather coming in, at least as far as the lower humidity goes, come Friday. And we will have clear skies for the most part, I would say, with the exception of some coastal showers by Saturday and Sunday. So the sunshine will be out again. And thankfully, while folks are cleaning up, maybe things will be a bit more comfortable. I do know after Helene, just 2 weeks ago, it was still awfully humid in quite a lot of places. So that always is kind of, the worst part is afterwards, you're still dealing with that rough, yucky weather. So hopefully we'll get even maybe some inland upper 50s by Friday, Saturday morning.
Wow. I mean, at least it offers some relief to people if there are widespread power outages, and that is probably to be expected.
Right. Yeah. And especially with the saturated grounds, and when we do get those wind gusts of 60 miles per hour, I would say that widespread trees down and power outages are usually a concern. Now, you do shift just into southern Flagler County and the south of Palm Coast and toward Daytona Beach. I think that's where folks will have more of an issue with roof damage and extensive power line damage. So at least for, my First Coast pals, we're looking more into, Daytona Beach southward for that kind of extensive damage.
Well, Lauren Rautenkranz, it's wonderful to talk to you. We so appreciate your forecasting. Thanks so much for coming on the program today, and please be safe.
Absolutely, Ann. You too, and everyone just stay calm. We got this.
All right. Thanks, Lauren. Up next, making sure you're current on your storm prep checklist. Welcome back. Whether you're an old salt or facing your first storm preps are the same, and some of them are really quite simple, but they help a great deal. And here to help you get ready as you can be, I'm joined by the CEO of the American Red Cross of Northeast Florida, Christian Smith. Good morning, Christian.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here. So we're getting close to impacts from the storm. The worst now are expected to arrive around dawn tomorrow. If I haven't even started preparing, what are the main things that I should be focused on right now?
Well, we want to make a couple of suggestions. One is to things that if you're going to stay in your home and not evacuate, whether you stay or leave, make sure you remove all those items, your lawn furniture, any kind of trash cans, any kind of debris that may be outside. All of those things, the wind will pick up and potentially come towards your house or your neighbor's house. And so that's first and foremost, those gas grills, the propane tanks, just bring all that stuff into your garage or into your home. The second thing is if you're going to stay in your home and you don't have that kit, look at those basic things. Gather the food, gather your water. Consider doing things like filling up your bathtubs and sinks. We may not experience the dramatic that other areas are going to, but still we may go periods of time without power. So filling up your bathtubs and your sinks, that'll allow you to flush toilets in the event you lose power so that you can still utilize those facilities that are really critical in times of disasters. And then, really talking with your family and talking about, in the event something changes, the winds get higher, or for some reason you experience some type of damage, or you and your family just want to be extra safe. Have you identified that safe room in your home? Where will you and your family ride the storm out? We think it looks like it's probably going to be good here, but staying on the couch and everybody sitting in that big room that's got the big open windows, that may not be the best thing for us at certain times through the storm. So going into that safe room and identifying that. And then finally, making sure you have access to your first aid kit. Did you get those prescription medications? We still have people that are coming in and out and going into the stores because they are open. But as the day goes on, you're going to be really careful about doing some of that. So right now is that critical time that you're wrapping up those last minute preparations.
And I know that you recommend having kind of a go kit that can last you 3 days and a at-home kit that can last about 2 weeks. Let's go through some of the specifics that you recommend having on hand for the stay-at-home folks. You said fill the bathtubs. Is it recommended to have some bleach on hand if that would be needed to disinfect water for drinking? And what kind of food do you suggest people get?
Sure. So first off, the water, when we talk about filling it with the bathtubs and the sinks, that is for cleaning and for flushing your toilets. We don't recommend that for utilizing for drinking water. So hopefully you filled up containers, and there's still time. The water's still good. Filling up your containers with water, placing them in your refrigerator or placing them on your counter so you'll have access to fresh, clean water. Ideally, you're going to have a gallon of water per person per day. But many people right now can utilize the water in their homes and just put it into containers. We don't recommend you putting them in old milk containers or something that has any kind of residue. So finding those containers that are clean and you feel comfortable that you would be drinking out of on a normal basis.
I know.
It's always, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
Also, when you're thinking about the kinds of foods, hopefully you grab those, those non-perishable items. Maybe you have grabbed some perishable items. That's okay to have, but really thinking about things you can eat right out of a can, things that you don't need to heat up. Lots of people will experiment with things like SpaghettiOs and tuna, and there's a lot of, heater meals and all kind of pre-packaged meals that we all have access to. Even these last-minute places that you can still have access to some of them. But the key is having things in a place that you and your family know where they are, having that manual can opener just in case, because that's going to be that period of time that you may go without power, and you just want to make sure that you and your family have access to food and water.
Yeah, a flashlight by the bedside is one that I've learned is a really good idea. And also, I know that during Irma, a lot of people tried to put things high up so that they wouldn't flood, and the furniture that they put them on ended up floating and turning over. So
Floating.
I guess countertops are a more reliable solution for putting important documents. We should just mention, I know that there's several shelters that are open. Some of them are pet friendly. They don't take reptiles, but they
Right.
do take ferrets. And so, any just last minute tips before we have to hang up here?
Sure. I mean, you make great points, and because we're kind of at that last minute time period, grabbing copies of your important papers, making sure that they are inside Ziploc bags. If you're coming to one of our shelters, we have Red Cross volunteers at all the shelters in the Duval County and the Putnam County area. So if you're going to be coming to one of the shelters, bring your items with you that you're going to need. We'll recommend you not bringing everything inside. But thinking about those basic things, do you have special dietary? Do you have medications? Are you going to make sure that there are going to be individuals that are going to be traveling with you? If there's some people who are going to be staying in your home, what's that plan to stay behind? So I think the biggest thing at this point is letting people know where you are, communicating to your family members in the community and outside of the community. And if you come into a sheltering environment, make sure you've told them that that's where you're going, because that will be much easier for us to help locate them in the event there is any type of damage or you lose communication.
Well, Christian Smith with the Red Cross of Northeast Florida, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And everybody just stay safe. And hopefully come Friday afternoon, we'll have a sunshiny day starting on the weekend.
That is what we're hoping for. Thank you so much. Up next.
Thank you.
Yes. Up next, we asked the president of the American Medical Association about the reimbursement battles fueling. Welcome back. I'm joined now by Dr. Bruce Scott, president of the American Medical Association. He's joining us from Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome, Dr. Scott.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be with you this morning.
It's wonderful to have you. I think most people have heard of the AMA, but many may not understand the role of the organization. I think in the simplest terms, you're kind of a lobbyist organization. Is that right? But the AMA means a lot more to people than just the role of a lobbyist.
Well, the AMA is a lot more than just a lobbying organization. We are the largest and most influential association of physicians all across America. We convene representatives of every state and of every specialty twice a year in order to develop policies that are in the best interest of our profession, but most importantly, the best interest of our patients. So we're obviously active within Washington, D.C., and we work with the state associations, including the Florida Medical Association, which is a very important partner of ours within the states. But we're also active within the court system to protect patients' and physicians' rights. We're active in education. We also are a credentialing organization that works with the different credentialing organizations, and we're a convener of physicians. So we are interested in promoting the art and science of medicine, and advancing public health is actually our mission.
And are there things that people would recognize that the AMA has done, either laws that it's helped change or court cases that it's brought that have affected patients or doctors in a way that a layperson would recognize?
Well, something very basic. The American Medical Association years ago was the group that was fighting the large tobacco industries to do things in the interest of public health, to get rid of smoking in public places, on elevators and such. We're also very instrumental, believe it or not, in simple things that affect people every day, like seatbelts in their cars, all in the interest of public health. So the AMA has been active since 1847. Actually, our founding was based upon combating quackery and misinformation that was spreading years ago among the patients in America. And we've stood by that ethical code ever since then, supporting the art and science of medicine.
And so the AMA is kind of a member organization to make sure that the people who are involved in providing health care are credentialed, legitimate, not quacks, as you say. Does the group get involved in political issues? I mean, there's so much about medicine, about science that has become, unfortunately, politicized. How does the AMA navigate those waters?
Well, let me be clear that the AMA is a nonpartisan organization, and we don't give endorsements or promotion for any particular candidate in any race, including, for example, the upcoming presidential election. But that said, when you ask, are we involved in politics? Absolutely. We're involved in advocacy for positions for healthcare in general and for our patients in Washington, D.C. We're very active in Washington, D.C., because there are so many issues that face medicine right now that need federal legislation to be enacted to address these issues that unfortunately seem to be kicked down the road by politicians too many times. And it's important for them to act because these are the issues that are impacting patients every single day.
So, what are some of your priority issues at present?
Well, the number one issue right now is Medicare and Medicare reimbursement. Believe it or not, Medicare reimbursement in 2024 is 29% less than what we were paid in 2001 when you adjust for inflation. So physician practices, just like all of your listeners, have faced high levels of inflation these last number of years, and yet Medicare is paying us less every year. In 2024, we received almost a 2% cut in what Medicare paid us for the same services provided years ago. And over the course of these years, the cuts have added up to the point that it's now having impact all across healthcare. And the impact in many cases is access. So Medicare patients in particular, our elderly, our most vulnerable patients, those with chronic disease, are having trouble finding a physician because so many physician practices financially can't make it anymore. And this is one of those issues that we can't kick down the can anymore. We need federal legislation to fix Medicare now. If not, I'm really worried about access is going to become more and more of a problem for all of the patients.
And we should be clear, most people understand what Medicare is and how it works, but that is federally financed health care for elderly patients, older patients, senior citizens. And the reimbursement that you're talking about is how much the government pays physicians for the work that they do, whether it's seeing a patient or performing some sort of surgery.
That's exactly right. It also takes care of people who are disabled and have chronic diseases and such, but it extends way beyond just those patients because you see in most every community, the contracts from the private payers are based upon the Medicare rate. So they pay a percentage of Medicare. So when the rate of Medicare reimbursement goes down, the reimbursement for all of your private payers goes down as well. And as a result, a recent study by the American Medical Association showed that 1 in 5 physicians are looking to retire or close their practice within the next 2 years. And we already have a shortage of physicians, and patients are already having difficulty getting appointments to see doctors, particularly new Medicare patients trying to find a primary care doctor or a specialist. And that situation is just going to get worse unless the federal government acts.
And so doctors, when they're faced with this, they're not getting reimbursed essentially what it costs them to provide that service. And you're advocating for those reimbursement rates to be increased. Who's fighting that? Like, who is against that improvement in the reimbursement rate or a more accurate reimbursement rate?
Well, getting anything accomplished in Washington, D.C. is difficult right now, but particularly when it has dollar signs attached to it. And admittedly, it's going to cost a lot of money. To provide more resources, more reimbursement to physicians by the federal government, it's going to cost more money. But if we can send billions of dollars overseas, we ought to be able to find money in order to make sure that we can guarantee the care that our senior citizens deserve, care that they have paid into a system through their entire life with the promise that the care was going to be there for them when they became of need for that care. So we need to live up to that promise, and we need our legislators to do what they know needs to be done. You see, part of the challenge is that there's a lag time, and physicians, to train a new physician, takes about 7 years minimum, 4 years of medical school and a minimum of 3 years of residency. So we can't afford to lose even one more physician today because we don't have time to replace them with a new physician for the future.
When you talk about reimbursement rates, I mean, there's the federal reimbursement, but then there's also the question as you said, of the insurance rate, how they reimburse doctors, very often based on that federal reimbursement rate. Locally here in Jacksonville and the First Coast, we've had a couple of really high profile disputes between insurance companies and providers. There's a dispute that was recently resolved between Florida Blue and Baptist Health here. And then there's also an ongoing dispute between United Healthcare and the University of Florida Jacksonville Hospital and their patients. And it has impacted some local, people who were previously covered as part of this one deal, now learning that they're not going to have their primary care physician any longer, that will not be an in-network covered doctor. And they're really going to have to scramble to find a new physician. Is that part of a larger trend that you're seeing in terms of disputes between providers and insurance companies over this kind of reimbursement schedule?
Absolutely. As the margins get thinner, the challenges get greater. I can tell you that in my market, that the largest private payer, they control 60% of the market here. They offered us rates recently in a contract that were less than what they paid us 7 years ago. And anyone who's been to the grocery store or the gas station knows that prices are a lot higher now than they were 7 years ago. And we tried to negotiate with them. And after months, they finally came to the table and gave us about a 2% increase. And one of the challenges is I'm in an independent private practice. And so each month, it seems like my rent goes up, my expenses go up. My staff, they need raises because they're facing those same realities at the gas pump and the grocery store. And I just simply don't have the money to give them. And, we didn't really have a good choice. This is the situation with contracting, is that they control 60% of the market. If my practice says no to the contract, my patients lose out. And if we say yes to the contract, financially, it's going to be more and more difficult to be sustained. A few months ago, there was a cyber attack on a intermediate who helps physicians file for bills. And for about 6 weeks, we didn't receive income from the services that we provided. And my practice had to take out a loan. That's how close to the margin we are in order to be able to pay my salaries and be able to pay the rent and our other due expenses. So I don't know the specifics of the dispute down there in Florida, but this is not a unique situation. And, physicians are making difficult choices. Do we employ less staff? Do we not update our equipment? Do we stop seeing patients altogether? Do we limit the number of Medicare patients that we see? Do we stop accepting new Medicare patients? And unfortunately, in some cases, physicians are giving up. And that just leads to more access problems for the patients.
I think it's really extraordinary. The president of the American Medical Association having to take out a loan because of those delays and that contractual, well, actually, that was just a hack, but, the fact that is so disruptive because the margins are so close. And you are a practicing physician. Does that give you a different perspective running the AMA than perhaps than it might someone else?
Well, as an active practicing physician in a small practice, I live the issues every day that we as physicians face. We have this declining reimbursement, a spiral down, and at the same time, it seems that more and more administrative burdens are piled upon us every year. More and more hassles in terms of prior authorization to try to get the care that our patients need, that we together decide that is the right thing for the patient. And then we have to justify that with an insurance representative, many times who's not been to medical school, and, rarely are they an otolaryngologist. And heck, I jokingly say that sometimes they can't even pronounce otolaryngology, but they're supposed to be the person making the decision. The decision without seeing the patient, without doing an examination, without talking to the patient. And yet they control the money, so they make the decisions. And it's ultimately, again, the patients that suffer.
Can you think of an example in your own practice where you've encountered something like that, where they're waiting for a prior authorization before you're proceeding with something that you think is a medically necessary procedure?
Oh, it's easy to think of an example. I can give you an example, and most physicians could probably from every day. But about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I saw a lady who had a tumor growing in her maxillary sinus right here in the middle of her face, right below her eye. And the tumor was growing and already beginning to erode into her eye. So I examined her, scoped her, and we talked about the options. And the best option for her was a surgical procedure. And it's a large surgical procedure to remove that tumor and hopefully save her eye. And after discussion, she decided that she wanted to proceed with the surgery. Now, she had some things she had to take care of first and put some orders in place. And we agreed to do the surgery about 2 weeks later. About 1 week later, she gets a letter from her insurance company, and I get the same letter that says that the procedure was denied because it was, quote, not medically necessary, unquote, going on to say that it was because she'd not been on an antibiotic and a steroid nasal spray. Now, even the lay people listening understand that an antibiotic and a nose spray that you can buy over the counter is not going to cure her tumor. So I got on the phone and I talked to the medical director, and after the peer-to-peer review, he agreed, and we did the surgery, and I'm happy to tell you that she did well. But let me tell you about the patient's perspective. I called her, and I said, we've gotten the surgery approved, and she paused, and she said, I don't understand. I trusted you, Dr. Scott. You told me I needed this big operation, and my insurance company says that all that I need is an over-the-counter nose spray? I explained to her the truth of the situation, and she understood. But imagine those days of stress, that anxiety that placed upon that patient when she was questioning the decision that she and her trusted physician had made. It's just wrong. And this is just one example that I could give you dozens more examples of.
There is an amendment on the ballot in Florida in November to do with abortion. It would basically restore the pre-Dobbs status of, a woman has a right to an abortion up to the point of viability under the direction of her medical advisor. Does the AMA have a position on abortion and abortion access?
I'm not familiar with the specific, I think you said a constitutional amendment or the specific legislation that you're speaking of, but I will discuss the fact that a foundational issue for healthcare is the relationship between a physician and a patient. And AMA strongly believes that government interference in whatever form into the relationship between a patient and their physician, and that relationship is wrong. And we should not allow that sort of intervention. When a physician is providing evidence-based, scientifically proven care to their patient, those decisions should be made between the patient and the physician. And that is clearly the policy of the American Medical Association.
Does the AMA have any concerns about the training of physicians in places where there currently is, abortion is restricted or very limited?
Well, the training program accreditation is done through a different organization than the American Medical Association. I know that they're looking at that and trying to find ways for physicians in those areas or training students and residents in those areas to be trained appropriately in the full band of reproductive health care and all of those sort of issues. So they're working through that, but it's a challenge.
I want to ask you just about, trust of the medical system. I think that came into question, particularly in the pandemic era and post-COVID. How does the AMA address what is perhaps an erosion of trust, not just in, medicine, but science more generally?
There has been an erosion in trust in general, not just in science, but where it impacts us. I said earlier that we are founded to promote the art of science, of medicine, and it is crucial that patients in particular trust their individual doctors. Now, we also want to restore the trust in physicians as a whole, and one of the issues that we've had to face is that some of the misinformation and disinformation that's been out there that has resulted in the distrust and questioning of science has been propagated by a small group of physicians. And one of the things the AMA has been doing is working with legislatures and with licensure boards to discipline those physicians, to get physicians to live up to their ethical duty to provide scientifically valid information to patients. And the AMA was founded based upon combating quackery, and the difference between the snake oil salesman of 1847 and the disinformation of 2022 through 2024 has been social media. The way that it can spread so rapidly to such a large group of people. And it's amazing to me sometimes that people trust what they see on their phone or their tablet more than they trust what they're being told by their trusted physician, the physician who has been making important decisions with them for years. And we need to work to restore that trust, but I strongly encourage your listeners to trust in their individual physician and work with their individual physicians to ask questions and make sure that they're getting appropriate care. One of the deleterious effects of this whole thing that is now being felt, for example, is the politicization of vaccination has resulted in the return of measles. In Kentucky and up in Indiana, just above us, we have a measles outbreak, a condition that was largely controlled by vaccination. But because of the spillover of the distrust in the COVID vaccine, many parents are questioning whether their child needs to get the measles vaccination, which has been around since before I was a child. So we need to restore that trust.
Just briefly, I understand that it was actually an injury that you suffered that got you into medicine in the first place. Is that correct?
Well, it didn't directly get me into medicine, but I guess it sparked my interest. When I was a teenager, a young teenager, my brother and I, who actually, John Scott, lives in the Jacksonville area. He is an anesthesiologist down there. And he and I were in the garage, and we were working on model airplanes, and I was climbing up to grab something that I needed, and I fell, and I grabbed for whatever I could grab to stop my fall, and a hook went all the way through my hand. So subsequently, I had to have a surgical procedure to restore the function of my hand. And well, I'm happy to tell you that I'm a surgeon today with full use of my hand. So, I recognize the ability of a surgeon, of a physician, to change my life, to restore something that was so essential to me. And I recognize that to this day, physicians change our patients' lives every day. And that is a sacred trust and something really special that physicians gain when we're able to help a patient. Patients send me letters or send appreciation to me, and they thank me for what I do for them, but I thank them for what they do for me, for restoring my hope that we can continue to help patients and cure illness and hopefully restore lives.
Well, he's Dr. Bruce Scott, president of the American Medical Association. Dr. Scott, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for helping spread the word about these important issues.
We'll be right back and just
Here.
glad that both of you were able to brave the early bands of the storm to come tell us about this. So, Tim, Arlington has been a lot of things to a lot of people over many, many years. But it's sort of become of late, the source of a lot of recognition and appreciation, particularly of its mid-century modern period. So tell us, besides your own writing, why this is kind of coming into focus more these days. Are we just sort of getting around to appreciate this kind of architecture?
Yeah, I think so. It's it kind of has to do with the strange question of what is historic, right? And of course, Europeans, I think, often think it's kind of funny that Americans consider things historic that aren't too old. But, when you're talking about things that maybe were built in your own lifetime and those things are suddenly historic, it's maybe not too flattering to you, but it's exciting to see what we're now calling and have been calling for a little while mid-century modern really come into fashion over the last several years. I think there's also a generational thing that happens where nothing is as unhip as what your parents and grandparents liked But when you get, a couple of decades past that, those things take on the kind of exoticism in a way.
Especially if your parents really didn't like them. Right?
Yeah, and that's
Right.
and that's where and that's where we are with mid-century modern, I think.
And Steve, this is the 8th year of this tour, which started in 2011. I mean, what's the purpose of the tour? What does Old Arlington hope to gain from opening the doors of these houses?
Well, it was really taking a stock of our assets back in, I guess it's about 14 years ago or so. We recognized that mid-century modern architecture was, Arlington has the best inventory in the city of Jacksonville. And we wanted.
Why is that?
Well, because the Matthews Bridge opened in 1953, and at that time it was to an Arlington that was just trees, rural, couple hamlets here and there, but it was very rural. So you had a blank canvas, and Jacksonville had a cadre of mid-century modern architects, and basically Arlington was their blank canvas.
Okay, so I interrupted you though.
Sure, no.
So Old Arlington recognized it had this great cache of kind of old mid-century modern buildings, maybe some not so old.
Right.
And when did you decide that you were going to try to organize a tour so people could see the insides?
Well, that was back 2011, I believe, was our first year that we did that. We just wanted to start showcasing. We had a couple people that had mid-century modern houses that said, "Yeah, I'll volunteer and open it up." It's a tough ask to ask people to invite people into their homes over the course of a weekend. So you'll have several hundred going through, but it is the opportunity to see the insides. And a lot of the mid-century design does focus on the inside. It's the inside melting with the outside, bringing the outside in. That's a big feature of mid-century modern. So this gives you the opportunity to appreciate the architects.
And that is kind of just one of the things you get inside these buildings, and some of them are just have these soaring ceilings or these incredible views of nature that are kind of incorporated into the way that they're built. They're not, here's your kitchen and here's your master bathroom or whatever. It really is very much just an adventure, a visual adventure when you go inside these buildings.
Yeah, I think so. I know we're going to be talking about Ted Pappas a little bit. His designs really bring in a lot of kind of old world influences, but make them contemporary and modern. And certainly architects like Robert Broward, and I know his Butterfly House is going to be on the tour. These are houses that really brilliantly bring the outside in, but also don't make you feel endangered by it in any way. And it's really kind of a masterful use of sometimes courtyard spaces and breeze blocks and yet feel absolutely as homey, if you want to use that word, as any house you might ever have been in.
Yeah. So we've got just like a short minute or so left. Tell us what the lineup is here. How do people get involved? And tell us a little bit more about the symposium aspect.
Okay. The tour itself starts with a symposium Saturday morning, and the weather forecast is spectacular for the whole weekend. So we're looking forward to that. It starts early at 9 o'clock, and in that first hour symposium, we're going to be honoring Ted Pappas, Jacksonville's greatest living architect right now, and looking forward to that symposium feature. You then have houses open for the next from 10 to 4 on Saturday and from noon to 4 on Sunday. You would start, and you can pick up tickets. If you haven't already gotten your tickets, you can pick up tickets at Norman Studios, which you can begin the tour at. That will be open. They have their museum exhibits up now, which if you have not been to Norman in the past year or so, it's a great opportunity to see what they've done there. And that continues on Sunday from 12 to 4.
And so you can get tickets day of, but you can get advance tickets too also at Norman?
Correct. Well, and you advance tickets are best online. Just go to oldarlington.org.
$25.
Yes, sir. Yes,
all right.
ma'am.
Well, listen, thank you so much for being here. I know it's going to be a beautiful weekend, and I'm sure it's going to be an extraordinary home show. So thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Steve,
Appreciate
Tim,
it.
thank you. Up next, a beloved rom-com moves from screen to stage at the Alhambra Dinner Theater.
Congaree & Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpenn.com. The law offices of Phillips, Hunt & Walker proudly support WJCT. Personal injury, criminal defense, and family law. Phillips, Hunt & Walker, committed to justice. 904-444-4444 or floridajustice.com.
Who do you want as a keynote speaker at Teach?
I would like to hear from Vincent Taylor.
I plan to use Vincent Taylor songs in my classroom.
Vincent Taylor? He was amazing.
I love Vincent Taylor's passion for education, and I want to hear more.
Join us at Teach for Vincent Taylor's keynote on Saturday, November 23rd. For more info, visit wjct.org/teach.
In Georgia, a Republican-led state election board is implementing new rules just weeks before Election Day.
At these state election board meetings, you'll have more than a dozen local election board members stand up and say, please don't pass these rules right now. We need to put a pause on this. Some of them even say some of the rules aren't bad, but it's just so late in the game.
Electoral upheaval in Georgia. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. He's a nice guy with a broken heart and a job as a wedding singer. That's the premise of the classic rom-com, The Wedding Singer. Joining me to talk about it are actors Jake Pierce, who plays the Adam Sandler character. Good morning, Jake.
How we doing?
Nice to have you. We're also joined by Brooklyn Kleekamp, who is in the role formerly inhabited by Drew Barrymore.
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning. So nice to have you here. So, Jake, was this like a favorite movie of yours before you were assigned to play this role?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up on all of the Adam Sandler stuff, and as soon as I saw it become a musical a few years ago, I just kind of have always wanted to pursue it, and kind of fell into my lap here in Jacksonville.
And how faithful is it for people who are like fans of the movie? How faithful is the story?
It stays pretty true to most of the writing. The songs are definitely different. It's a full original score. I mean, you've got the classics. You'll hear Grow Old With Me. You'll hear Somebody Kill Me. And then they take a lot of the jokes, and you hear some of the punchlines here and there. But they did a great job of kind of reworking the classic movie and getting the heart of the movie that everybody knows and loves. And then you come out humming the tune. The opening song is literally called It's Your Wedding Day. So, I mean, it gets stuck in your head, and you walk out and keep humming the same tunes.
And Brooklyn, how is it playing, such an iconic character, such an iconic role? What do you bring to that, and how do you avoid getting kind of trapped by it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Drew Barrymore's take is so iconic, and I think she's a soft Julia. Like in the movie, she's pretty soft, but she has a lot of heart. She's very vulnerable. And with the stage version, I'm lucky that they kind of dive a little bit deeper. She has some songs that bring out those wants. You get to really kind of dive down a little bit more with her as she assesses the situation in front of her, either Glenn or Robbie. But
yeah, and so people who aren't familiar, I'll be quite honest, I actually have never seen The Wedding Singer, which my producer could not believe. But the premise is, that there's this woman who's being kind of making a choice between two men, right? She's engaged to be married, and she's falling for the wedding singer at her own wedding. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do try to incorporate some of those softer moments that Drew has in the movie. Julia isn't necessarily written to be funny like some of the other characters are, but she does have funny moments. So I try to take those in stride and play with those. And I just think that she's an awesome kind of modern woman. I try to update that a little bit for the stage version.
Yeah. And Jake, this is kind of a roller coaster of emotions for your character, right? There's heartbreak because you've been left at the altar. You're also, have this new love, but it's a comedy. And so how do you balance sort of that vulnerability and the comedic moments that you also have to deliver?
Yeah, it's a really, I mean, roller coaster is a great way to put it. Thankfully, some of the songs give a lot of comedic relief to different moments, and all of the other characters within the show. So thankfully, Robbie's got a great core unit with Sammy and Nick, who plays George. Those guys bring so much with Robbie that they kind of help alleviate some of the stress that comes with the moments where I literally have to just drop everything and become so emotionally wrecked and then turn around and get thrown into a dumpster. And we have an entire moment where Julia sings an entire song about Robbie being in the dumpster and how much fun it is to how easy it is to kind of come out of the dumpster, which is literally the entire song, trying to not give away the whole plot. But yeah, I mean, it's hard, it's difficult, but it's great to have such an support system within our cast where everybody loves each other so much and has those moments of checking in. There's multiple times throughout the show where we both just get to be like, "You good?" Because you were crying. Like, "You all right?" And just getting to turn around and leave it all on the stage and then come right back and do it again.
Yeah, and Brooklyn, this is, I mean, you guys are the stars of the show, obviously, but this is also really an ensemble performance, right? And has a really high energy, delivery and appeal. So it must be pretty fun, I guess, just kind of being in that environment in addition to being the lead.
Yeah, it is. It's extremely fun. And our ensemble is fantastic. They work extremely hard, and we could not do it without them. I mean, they are so integral to the story too. I mean, there are so many featured parts for them as well, and we get to interact with them here and there, which is awesome as a lead because sometimes it's not that way. Sometimes the leads are just on their own and there's the ensemble, but truly it is a nice mixture of the two. And it's always fun to find those moments as we settle into our run to really connect with those ensemble members where it's not scripted. And I think that's honestly one of the best parts of our show is that we have kind of a little bit of leeway to do that with our cast.
Yeah. And we should say, because of the storm, you guys are taking a little hiatus tonight, right?
It's just tonight and Thursday night. Yeah.
And then it'll pick it up again and it runs.
We'll be right back on Friday all the way through November 10th.
Yes.
Tuesday to Sunday.
Excellent.
2 shows, Saturdays, Sundays.
Yeah.
Well, Jake Pierce, Brooklyn Kleekamp, thank you so much for being here. The show is at the Alhambra Theater. It's The Wedding Singer. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
And that's our program. Thank you so much for listening. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. If you have either, you can email them to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Join us tomorrow when we talk to former FEMA Chief of Staff, Jason McNamara. He's going to talk to us about what residents can expect in terms of response and recovery in the wake of Hurricane Milton. Be safe out there. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Visit Gainesville, Alachua County presents the Tom Petty Weekend, an official festival of the Tom Petty Nation. with 3 days of live music and rock and roll history, October 11th through 13th. Details at visitgainesville.com/Tom Petty.